Okay, fine, sure, lol, yeah, 5 responses. 5 words. And if you've ever received any of them from someone you care about, you already know the feeling. It's not anger, exactly. It's not sadness, not right away. It's something quieter than that. Something that sits in your chest like a question you can't quite form, because on the surface, they did reply. They technically answered. But something was missing, something important, and you felt it instantly, even if you couldn't name it. You read the message again. You look at it. 1 word, maybe 2. No emotion, no warmth, no effort. And your brain does what it always does in moments like that. It starts searching for meaning. Are they mad at me? Did I say something wrong? Do they even want to talk to me right now? And within seconds, you've gone from a simple text exchange to a full emotional investigation, running scenarios in your head, replaying your last conversation, scanning for clues. But what if I told you that you're solving the wrong mystery? What if the dry reply you just received isn't a code for rejection, but a window into something happening inside that person's mind that they themselves may not fully understand? What if those short, cold, seemingly indifferent messages are not about how they feel toward you, but about how they feel inside themselves? That's what this video is really about. And trust me, what you're going to learn here is not what most people expect. If this kind of deep, honest content about human behavior resonates with you, go ahead and hit subscribe and leave a like right now. Because this channel is built for exactly this, for seeing what most people miss. And please, stay all the way through because there's something near the end of this video that could genuinely change a relationship in your life. Now, let's start with what everyone assumes. When someone replies dry, the automatic interpretation is disinterest. We think they don't care enough to give me a real answer, and that assumption feels logical. It feels obvious. If someone cared, they'd show it, right? They'd match your energy. They'd engage. They'd at least throw in an emoji or an exclamation mark. The absence of effort becomes, in our minds, the absence of feeling, and that's where most people stop thinking about it. But psychology doesn't stop there, because the truth is far more layered than effort equals interest and silence equals apathy. The truth is that the way someone communicates at any given moment is shaped by forces that have very little to do with the person on the other end of the conversation, and almost everything to do with what's happening inside their own nervous system. Let's begin with the most common and most overlooked cause of dry replies. Emotional depletion. There is a state that psychologists refer to as ego depletion, the idea that your mental and emotional energy operates like a battery. Every decision you make, every interaction you navigate, every emotion you process throughout the day drains that battery a little more. And when the battery gets low, your brain starts cutting corners. Not because it wants to, but because it has to. It begins conserving energy in the areas that feel safest to neglect. And here's the key. Communication with people you feel close to is often the first thing your brain economizes on. Not because those people matter less, but because your brain trusts that those connections can survive a low-effort moment. The coworker you barely know gets a carefully worded, polished email. The person you love gets okay. This is not a contradiction. It's how the brain prioritizes under pressure. The more emotionally safe you are to someone, the more likely you are to receive their most unfiltered, most reduced, most exhausted version of communication. And that version can look, from the outside, exactly like someone who doesn't care at all. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Because depletion is just the surface layer. Beneath it, there's something deeper. Something that most people carry without ever recognizing it. Some people reply dry not because they're tired, but because they've been trained to. Not in a classroom, not formally, but through years of emotional experience that taught them one very specific lesson, that expressing too much is dangerous. Think about someone who grew up in a home where showing enthusiasm was met with ridicule, or where expressing sadness led to being told they were overreacting, or where saying too much always seemed to create conflict. What does a child in that environment learn? They learn to shrink. They learn that the safest version of communication is the smallest one. They learn that short answers protect you, that giving less means risking less. And they carry that lesson into every relationship they enter as adults. So when that person sends you a one-word reply, they're not being cold. They're being careful. They're running an ancient automatic program that tells them, don't give too much of yourself away because the last time you did, it cost you something. This is what psychologists call an avoidant communication pattern, and it doesn't come from a lack of feeling. It comes from an excess of it. These are often people who feel very deeply, but have learned that depth is a liability, so they control it. They contain it. They give you fine instead of I've been thinking about you all day, but I don't know how to say that without feeling exposed. And this is the part that breaks my heart a little, because the people who reply the driest are sometimes the people who feel the most. They've just built walls so carefully, so consistently, that even they forget there's something behind them. Now I want to take you somewhere most videos on this topic never go. I want to talk about what happens in the brain during a dry reply, not in the brain of the person reading it, but in the brain of the person writing it. When someone is experiencing emotional overwhelm, whether it's stress, anxiety, grief, confusion, or even joy they're not sure how to process, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for language, nuance, and emotional articulation, becomes less active. It's not shut down entirely, but it's working harder. And the result is that complex emotional expression becomes genuinely difficult. The words don't come. Not because they don't exist inside the person, but because the bridge between feeling and language narrows under emotional pressure. So the person stares at their phone, they read your message, they feel something. Maybe something big. But when they try to respond, the only thing that comes out is, yeah, not because that's all they feel, but because that's all their brain can produce in that moment. The emotion is there, the language isn't, and the gap between what they feel and what they type becomes the space where misunderstanding is born. And you, on the other side, read that yeah and think it means nothing, when in reality, it might be the only word they could manage while feeling everything. I want you to hold that thought because we're going to come back to it in a moment. But first, I need to tell you about a pattern that operates in the background of almost every human relationship, and it changes the meaning of dry replies entirely. It's something researchers call the demand-withdraw dynamic, and it works like this. In most close relationships, there is one person who tends to pursue connection more actively, and one person who tends to retreat when things feel emotionally intense. The pursuer reaches out, asks questions, seeks closeness. The withdrawer pulls back, gives less, responds minimally. Now here's what most people don't realize. The withdrawer isn't pulling away because they don't want connection. In many cases, they want it just as much. But their nervous system responds to emotional closeness with a kind of internal alarm. Not because closeness is bad, but because their system has associated it with vulnerability, and vulnerability with risk. So they withdraw, not to reject, but to regulate. They need space the same way you might need reassurance. It's the same emotional need, just expressed in the opposite direction. And dry replies are often the textual version of this withdrawal. The person is not leaving the conversation. They're still replying, but they're replying from a regulated distance, a distance that allows them to stay connected without feeling overwhelmed. Cool, got it, sounds good. These aren't exit statements. They're holding patterns. The person is still in orbit around you, they've just pulled back to a distance where they can breathe. And this is where I want to say something briefly, but honestly. I know this video is narrated with an AI voice, but behind all of this is a real person. My name is Fernando, and I truly appreciate you being here. I hope you and everyone you love are blessed beyond measure. Now, let me continue, because there's still something important I haven't told you yet. Let me talk about something that's harder to hear. Because not every dry reply is about protection or exhaustion or emotional overwhelm. Sometimes a dry reply is a test. Not a cruel one, usually. Not a calculated one, but a subconscious one. Some people, especially those with insecure attachment patterns, use minimal communication as a way to gauge how much the other person cares. They pull back slightly and watch what happens. Will you chase? Will you notice? Will you ask if something's wrong? Or will you match their energy and drift away? This isn't manipulation in the traditional sense. It's more like an emotional experiment, one they may not even know they're running. They've been hurt before. They've invested in people who disappeared. And now, before they let themselves fully invest again, they need evidence that you won't do the same. So they give you less, and they watch what you do with it. And this puts you in an incredibly difficult position, because if you pull away in response, they interpret it as confirmation that you were going to leave anyway. But if you push too hard for more, they feel pressured and withdraw further. It's a paradox that has no clean solution, only awareness. And awareness is what changes things. Because once you understand that a dry reply might be a quiet question disguised as an answer, you stop reacting to the surface and start responding to the need beneath it. Now, here's something that changes the picture even more: context. The meaning of a dry reply depends enormously on when it happens and how it compares to that person's baseline. And this is where most people make their biggest interpretive mistake. They compare someone's communication to their own standards instead of comparing it to that person's own patterns. Some people are naturally concise communicators. Their warmth doesn't live in exclamation marks or long paragraphs. It lives in the fact that they replied at all. For them, "sounds good" is the equivalent of someone else's 3-paragraph enthusiastic response. It carries the same weight, just in a different container. So before you decode a dry reply, ask yourself, is this different from how they usually communicate? If someone who normally writes paragraphs suddenly sends one word, that's a signal. Something has shifted. But if someone who has always been brief continues to be brief, that's not a signal at all. That's their language. And expecting them to speak yours is a recipe for constant disappointment. This brings me to something I think is critical, something that ties everything we've talked about together. The real problem with dry replies isn't the replies themselves. It's what we do with them in the space between reading and reacting. Because in that space, a war happens. Your attachment system fires up. Your past experiences flood in. Every time someone went cold before they left, every time silence preceded abandonment, every time you were told, "I'm fine," by someone who was already halfway out the door, all of it rushes into the present moment and colors the message you just received with emotions that belong to a completely different time and a completely different person. You're not just reading a text. You're reading every text you've ever been hurt by projected onto this one. And that projection is invisible. It feels like truth. It feels like instinct. But it's memory, dressed up as intuition. And this is why two people can receive the exact same dry reply and have completely different emotional reactions to it. One person shrugs and moves on. Another person spirals for hours. The difference isn't the message. It's the history each person carries into the moment they read it. So if you find yourself constantly destabilized by short replies, by minimal effort, by emotional distance in communication, it's worth asking a question that has nothing to do with the other person. It's worth asking, what am I bringing to this moment that doesn't actually belong here? That's not a comfortable question, but it's a transformative one. Now, I promised you a more serious part of this video, and this is it. Because while everything I've said so far explains the normal, human, understandable reasons behind dry communication, there are moments when a shift in someone's communication style is not just a mood or a pattern, it's a warning. If someone who used to communicate with warmth and presence has gradually become consistently flat, consistently short, consistently disconnected, and that change has persisted over weeks or months, not just a day or two, pay attention. That kind of sustained withdrawal can sometimes indicate depression. People experiencing depression often lose the ability to generate the energy required for engaged communication. They're not choosing to be distant. They're drowning quietly, and dry replies might be the only signal reaching the surface. It can also indicate emotional burnout, the kind where a person has given so much for so long that they've simply run out. They haven't stopped caring. They've stopped being able to show it. And the people closest to them are usually the last to receive whatever emotional energy they have left. Not because they're least important, but because the performance required for acquaintances takes everything they've got. And in some cases, if the dryness is accompanied by control, by punishment, by a sense that warmth is being deliberately withheld as leverage, that's no longer a psychological process. That's emotional withholding, and it's a form of relational harm that deserves to be named clearly. Understanding the psychology behind someone's behavior is powerful. But it should never be used to justify patterns that consistently leave you feeling small, confused, or unworthy of real connection. Compassion for someone's inner world and respect for your own emotional needs are not competing values. They are both necessary, always. So where does all of this leave you? The next time you receive a reply that feels cold, that feels empty, that feels like it carries nothing when you are hoping for something, I want you to try something different. Instead of immediately interpreting what it means about you, pause and wonder what it means about them. Not to excuse it, not to tolerate mistreatment, but to see more clearly. Because here's what I've learned about human communication, and this might be the most important thing I say in this entire video. The words people give you are not always a reflection of what they feel. Sometimes they are the reflection of what they can afford to feel at that moment. Sometimes the shortest message carries the heaviest weight behind it. And sometimes the person who types "ke" is the same person who almost typed "I miss you, and I don't know how to say it, and I'm terrified that if I do, it'll change something between us that I'm not ready to change." They didn't send that. They sent "ke," but the full sentence was there, living in the space between what they felt and what they had the courage to express. And that space, that invisible distance between emotion and language, is where so much of human connection gets lost. So don't just read the message, read the person, read the moment, read the history, and most importantly, read yourself, because your interpretation is never neutral. It's always shaped by what you've been through, what you fear, and what you need. The driest reply you've ever received might have been the loudest thing someone couldn't say. And the moment you start hearing the silence between the words, you'll never read a message the same way again.